Welcome to our deep dive today. We're going to be talking about something that might surprise you. Organizational sabotage.
Ooh.
Now, when you think sabotage, you probably think like spies. And sneaking around and,
Yeah.
things blowing up.
Right.
That's not quite what we're talking about today.
Okay.
It's much more subtle. We're going for something a lot more like everyday office life, gone wrong.
Uh-huh.
We're using this book as our guide. Organizational sabotage, how to spot it and how to stop it.
Okay.
And this book argues that good intentions can actually pave the road.
Well, organizational chaos.
That's right. It digs into how these seemingly harmless actions can actually be really detrimental to the organization as a whole. And what I find really fascinating is that it draws these parallels between modern workplace behaviors and wartime sabotage tactics.
Like, really? Are you saying like my overflowing inbox is like a war zone? Okay, maybe I'm exaggerating a little bit, but you definitely have my attention. So where do wartime tactics come into play in all this? So the book uses this old OSS manual, which was like the precursor to the CIA. And it highlights tactics like insist on doing everything through channels or refer all matters to committees. And these were actual sabotage tactics designed to slow things down, create confusion. Think about your average workplace. How many times have you encountered those behaviors?
Oh, yeah. All the time.
And they're usually not done with malicious intent, right? It's often people trying to be thorough, trying to get everyone on board. But the impact can be surprisingly similar to deliberate sabotage.
Okay, I see where you're going with this. So the book is arguing that these seemingly harmless actions, things that we often do with the best of intentions, can actually end up hurting our organizations.
Exactly, and because they're often unintentional, they can be even harder to detect and address.
So we're not dealing with like a villain in a black hat twirling their mustache.
Right. It's more about understanding how even good intentions can sometimes lead to negative outcomes.
So if we're not dealing with the mustache twirling villains, who are these saboteurs then? Is it all of us? Am I a saboteur?
In a way, yes. We all have the potential to be unintentional saboteurs. But that's why this awareness is so crucial. The book breaks down these 3 specific sabotage tactics that are really common, especially in today's digital age. And once you recognize them, you can start to see them everywhere.
Okay, you've got me hooked. What's the first one? Lay it on me.
The first one is CC everyone, which I'm sure you're familiar with.
Oh, yeah. Who hasn't been on one of those never-ending email chains?
Yeah.
Sometimes I feel like my entire day is spent trying to escape, like an email black hole.
I know.
But I always thought at least everyone's in the loop, right?
That's the illusion, isn't it? The book actually argues
Cabrio.
that CC everyone can be reframed as the illusion of communication. Because you're right, it creates this appearance of collaboration, of transparency. But in reality, it often leads to information overload. People start skimming. Important details get lost in the noise, and decisions get delayed.
So instead of fostering communication, it's actually hindering it. It's kind of counterintuitive. But it makes sense when you think about it. I've definitely felt that information overload. But what can we do about it? Should we just abolish email altogether?
Well, that might be a bit extreme, but I think we can become more mindful of our emailing habits. Before you hit send, just ask yourself, does everyone on this list really need to be CC'd? And sometimes a quick phone call or a face-to-face conversation is much more effective than a lengthy email chain.
I like that. It's about choosing the right tool for the job, so to speak.
Exactly. Now let's move on to the second sabotage tactic. Get involved, volunteer, participate.
Okay, that one seems a little counterintuitive. I mean, isn't being engaged a good thing?
It can be a good thing,
Yeah.
but the book highlights that there's this fine line between being helpful and becoming a martyr to the cause.
Oh, yeah, I've definitely seen this. Think about that person who says yes to everything.
They volunteer for every committee, they take on these extra projects, they mentor a dozen new hires. They seem like a superstar at first, right?
Right.
But what happens when their plate gets too full?
They get overwhelmed. The quality of their work suffers, and they burn out. And sometimes their overcommitment actually ends up creating more work for everyone else.
Yeah. They're scrambling to meet deadlines, delegating tasks last minute.
Right. It just becomes this domino effect.
A domino effect of unintentional sabotage.
Yeah.
And this is where leadership plays a key role. It's about creating a culture where saying no isn't seen as a lack of commitment, but as a way to protect everyone's time and energy.
So how do you strike that balance between being a team player and setting healthy boundaries?
It is tricky, and there's no one-size-fits-all answer, but I think it starts with recognizing that saying no is not a sign of weakness. It's about prioritizing your time and energy so you can really focus on what truly matters.
Okay, that makes sense. So we've covered 2 tactics so far. What's the third one?
So this one is particularly relevant to modern organizational structures. It's trust that accountability is in the matrix.
Oh boy. Before we dive into that, I want you to imagine for a moment you're working on a project and you report to 2 different managers.
Okay.
Manager A wants you to prioritize task X, while Manager B is pushing you to focus on task Y. Both are urgent. Both are important. Who do you answer to? Who's accountable when those deadlines slip?
That sounds like a recipe for disaster.
I can already feel like my stress levels rising just thinking about that. But isn't that how a lot of organizations are structured these days? With these matrix setups?
Yeah.
And multiple reporting lines?
Exactly. The matrix structure was designed to create more flexibility and collaboration. But, as the book points out, it can also create a breeding ground for unintentional sabotage.
Oh, how so?
Accountability gets lost. This web of dotted lines. Decisions get stalled. And frustration mounts.
So it's not necessarily the matrix structure itself that's the problem, but rather how it's implemented and managed.
That's a great way to put it. And that's where clear communication and defined roles become absolutely crucial. If everyone knows who is responsible for what, and there are clear paths for escalation and decision-making, the matrix can actually be a very effective organizational structure. But if those elements are lacking, then you're setting yourself up for a whole lot of unintentional sabotage.
Okay, this is all starting to make a lot of sense. We've identified 3 common sabotage tactics: the illusion of communication, martyr to the cause, and accountability in the matrix. But knowing is only half the battle, right? What can we actually do to prevent these things from happening in our own organizations?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? And luckily,
Yeah.
the book does offer some practical solutions. But before we get into those, I think it's important to emphasize that the first step is awareness. Once we can recognize these subtle forms of sabotage, we can start to address them head on.
So it's all about developing that anti-sabotage lens, right? Being able to spot these patterns in our own workplaces and having the courage to call them out. But how do we do that without sounding like we're accusing people of being saboteurs?
That's where framing it as unintentional sabotage becomes so important. It's not about blame. It's about understanding how our actions, even those with the best intentions, can sometimes have these unintended consequences.
This is so fascinating. So we've uncovered this secret world of unintentional sabotage lurking in our everyday work lives. We've learned that it's not about malicious intent. It's about good intentions gone awry. And we've even identified the 3 most common tactics: the illusion of communication, martyr to the cause, and accountability in the matrix. But now the question is, what do we do about it? How do we stop this unintentional sabotage from derailing our organizations?
You've hit the nail on the head. I think the next step is to dive into some practical solutions, things that you can actually implement in your own workplace. But first, let's just take a moment to reflect on what we've learned so far. What stands out to you?
I think what stands out to me is that this isn't about pointing fingers or finding someone to blame. It's about recognizing that we all have the potential to be unintentional saboteurs. And once we understand that, we can start to change our behaviors and create a more productive and fulfilling work environment for everyone.
I couldn't agree more. And that's a perfect segue into the next part of our deep dive.
Okay, where we'll explore some practical solutions for combating these subtle forms of sabotage. Sounds good to me. So let's take a deep breath, grab a metaphorical shovel, and get ready to dig into some solutions.
I like it.
We'll be right back after a quick break. Welcome back. So, we've identified these sneaky sabotage tactics. Now let's get down to the nitty-gritty. How do we actually fight back?
It's all about taking action. Remember, we're not trying to expose some evil mastermind. It's about recognizing the patterns and then shifting our behavior.
Okay, I'm ready for a behavior makeover. Where do we start?
Let's revisit that illusion of communication. We've talked about being more mindful about who we CC on emails. But what else can we do to combat this?
Well, I think we need to move beyond individual email habits and look at organizational culture. If everyone is CCing everyone else out of fear of missing something or stepping on toes, then that's a bigger problem.
You're absolutely right. Leaders need to set clear expectations for communication. Instead of defaulting to CC everyone, encourage people to use other tools like project management software, team messaging platforms, or even, dare I say it, picking up the phone.
I love that. Using the right communication tool for the situation, not just blasting everyone with emails and hoping for the best. But what about that? Martyr to the cause problem. How do we encourage people to set boundaries without making them feel like they're not being team players?
This is where recognizing and rewarding focused effort becomes crucial. Instead of praising people for working late nights and weekends, celebrate those who manage their time effectively and deliver high-quality work within reasonable hours. And it's important for leaders to model this behavior themselves. If the boss is always sending emails at midnight, it sends a message that everyone else should be doing the same.
So it's about creating a culture where work-life balance is valued, not just talked about.
I imagine that's tricky though, right?
It is tricky. People want to be seen as valuable, as indispensable. And this is where addressing those underlying psychological drivers can be helpful. Why do people feel the need to say yes to everything? Is it a fear of missing out? Is it a desire to please? Once we understand those motivations, we can start to address them more effectively.
That makes a lot of sense. So it's not just about telling people to set boundaries. It's about creating a culture
Yeah.
where they feel safe
Yeah.
and empowered to actually do so. Okay, so we've tackled communication and boundaries. What about our friend accountability in the matrix? This one feels particularly challenging.
It is, especially in these large, complex organizations. But I think the solution lies in clarity and transparency. Make sure everyone understands their roles, their responsibilities, and who they report to. And when there are multiple stakeholders involved, establish clear decision-making processes. Who has the final say? What are the escalation procedures? And so it's like creating a roadmap for accountability. Everyone knows where they stand and where to go if they encounter an obstacle. But what about those situations where things inevitably fall through the cracks? How do we deal with that?
That's where a culture of learning and continuous improvement comes in, instead of pointing fingers. When something goes wrong, encourage people to view it as an opportunity to learn and improve. Ask questions like, what happened? Why did it happen? How can we prevent it from happening again?
I love that approach. It's about shifting the focus from blame to learning and growth.
Exactly.
It sounds like all of these solutions are really interconnected, right? You can't just address one tactic in isolation. It's about creating a holistic culture that supports effective communication, healthy boundaries, and clear accountability.
You've hit the nail on the head. It's not a quick fix. It's an ongoing process of cultural transformation.
This has been so insightful, but I'm curious, how do you even start to implement these changes? Where do you even begin?
Well, I think it starts with recognizing that even small changes can have a ripple effect. You don't have to overhaul your entire organizational structure overnight. Start with something manageable, like setting clear communication guidelines for your team, or encouraging your colleagues to block out time on their calendars for focused work.
So it's about taking those first steps, however small, and building momentum from there.
Exactly. And remember, it's a journey, not a destination. There will be setbacks and challenges along the way. But with a commitment to awareness, communication, and continuous improvement, you can make a real difference in your workplace.
I'm feeling energized and ready to take on those unintentional saboteurs. But before we wrap up, I want to touch on something you mentioned earlier about the broader implications of these tactics. You said that this isn't just limited to the workplace, right?
That's right. These patterns of unintentional sabotage can show up in all areas of our lives. Think about your community groups, your volunteer organizations, even your own personal goals. How many times have you seen a project stall because of endless email chains or unclear responsibilities? Or maybe you've experienced burnout yourself because you said yes to too many things.
You know what? You're absolutely right. I've definitely fallen into that martyr to the cause trap in my own personal life, trying to do everything for everyone and ending up exhausted and resentful. It's like those unintentional sabotage tactics have a way of seeping into every corner of our lives.
It's a great point, and it highlights the importance of applying those same principles of awareness, communication, and boundary setting to all areas of our lives. It's about recognizing those patterns and making conscious choices about how we spend our time and energy.
So it's not just about creating healthier workplaces, it's about creating healthier lives overall. I love that. But it also makes me wonder, how much are we losing as a society because of this unintentional sabotage? How much potential is being wasted because of these seemingly harmless actions?
That's a fascinating question, and one that I don't think we have a clear answer to. But it's definitely something to ponder, isn't it?
It is, and it makes me even more determined to spread the word about unintentional sabotage and empower people to make positive changes. But I think we've covered a lot of ground today. We've explored this concept of unintentional sabotage. We've identified 3 common tactics, and we even delved into some practical solutions.
We have, and I hope our listeners are walking away with a better understanding of how these seemingly harmless actions can impact their workplaces and their lives.
I hope so too. So as we wrap up this deep dive, what's one key takeaway you'd like our listeners to remember?
I think awareness is key. Start paying attention to those seemingly harmless actions and ask yourself, could this be a form of unintentional sabotage? Once you start seeing those patterns, you can begin to shift your behaviors and create a more positive and productive environment.
Beautifully said. And remember, folks, this is just the beginning. Share your experiences with us on social media. Let us know what resonated with you and tell us about the unintentional sabotage you've spotted in the wild. We're in this together.
Absolutely. And remember, even small changes can make a big difference. So go out there and start making those changes. You might be surprised by the positive impact it has on your work and your life.
You know, as we wrap up this deep dive into unintentional sabotage, I'm struck by how much it overlaps with something I've been reading about lately, cognitive biases.
That's an interesting connection. What have you been learning about cognitive biases?
Well, cognitive biases are these mental shortcuts that our brains take to simplify decision-making. They can be really helpful in a lot of situations, but they can also lead us to make flawed judgments or act in ways that aren't in our best interests.
And how do you see that connecting to unintentional sabotage?
Well, I think a lot of these seemingly harmless actions we've been discussing might actually stem from these cognitive biases. For example, CC everyone could be linked to the availability bias, where we overestimate the likelihood of something bad happening if we don't keep everyone in the loop.
That's fascinating. And that martyr to the cause tactic could be related to the sunk cost fallacy, where we feel obligated to keep investing time and energy into something, even if it's no longer serving us.
So it's like our brains are playing tricks on us, making us believe these sabotage tactics are actually helpful or necessary.
I think you're onto something really important here. Understanding these underlying cognitive biases could really be a key to preventing unintentional sabotage. If we can become more aware of these mental shortcuts, we can start to challenge them and make more conscious choices.
It's like adding another layer of protection to our anti-sabotage arsenal. We're not just looking at behaviors, we're looking at the thought processes that are driving those behaviors.
Exactly. And it really reinforces the importance of critical thinking and self-reflection. We need to constantly question our assumptions and be willing to challenge our own beliefs.
It's like we need to become our own sabotage detectives, constantly on the lookout.
I love that analogy. And remember, it's not about being perfect. It's about being aware and striving to make better choices.
This whole conversation has really opened my eyes to these subtle ways we can sabotage ourselves and our organizations. It's not about malicious intent. It's about understanding how even our best intentions can sometimes lead to these negative outcomes.
And ultimately, it's about empowering ourselves and others to make positive changes.
Well, folks, that brings us to the end of our deep dive into unintentional sabotage. We hope you found it as enlightening.
As we did. And remember, this is just the beginning of the conversation. Share your thoughts and experiences and insights with us on social media. Let's continue to explore this fascinating topic together.
Until next time, stay vigilant, stay curious, and keep those anti-sabotage lenses sharp. Happy deep diving.